Welcome to episode 4 of The Culinary Citizen, a gastronomic guide to international relations. This is Sam Chappell-Sokol.
And Kelsey Marr. Each week we introduce you to a concept or theme connecting food and people around the world. This week we'd like to welcome Professor Dara Goldstein, a cookbook author and professor of Russian at Williams College in Massachusetts.
We're so glad you're here. A little more background about Professor Goldstein. Dara is an award-winning cookbook author and a professor of Russian at Williams. She is the founding editor of Gastronomica, a journal of food and culture. The topics of Dara's cookbooks include vegetarian dishes, baking, and regional cuisines from the former Soviet Union. Most recently, she's published a cookbook on the Nordic region, which I just bought from her and got signed by her. It's called Fire and Ice. It includes glowing blurbs from Renee Redzepi, Dan Barber, and Ruth Reichel. Dan Barber, the chef and intellectual behind Blue Hill in New York, had this to say about Dara. She's the best kind of food scholar. She's a gourmet and a gourmand, driven by equal parts hedonism and curiosity. Dara and I first met when she moderated a panel I was on about culinary diplomacy at this year's International Association of Culinary Professionals Conference. She moderated, I'll add, with a healthy dose of diplomacy, and I was very thankful for her presence on the panel.
Thank you, Sam.
So Dara, can you tell us a little bit about the path of how you got to where you are today?
Yes, it actually started many, many years ago. When I entered graduate school at Stanford, I wanted to do my dissertation on food in Russian literature. And I was basically told that I wasn't a serious person. It was a long time ago. Luckily, things have changed, and I think graduate students are being encouraged to explore topics relating to food, but not then. And so I dutifully did a dissertation on a Russian modernist poet. I'm not sorry that I did because it was very enriching, but I couldn't get food out of my mind. It was extraordinary to me how in Russian 19th century literature in particular, so many of the characters' personalities and the way that the novels evolved in terms of plot were focused on food. The characters were I hate to say characters were characterized by, but in fact they were characterized by what they ate. And because there was so much censorship, a lot of that what might otherwise be erotic writing was sublimated through food. So I thought it was a wonderful way to enter into an understanding of another culture's literature. So while I was doing my dissertation and preparing for my comprehensive exams, I was also writing down what the different characters were eating. Mm-hmm. And that really led to my first cookbook, which was A Taste of Russia, published in 1983, and now in its 30th anniversary edition. What I might add there that ties into this whole idea of culinary diplomacy is that in 1978-79, I was in the Soviet Union. It was the height of the Cold War, working for the U.S. Information Agency, which was a branch of the State Department. And relations were very tense, particularly because this exhibition that I was a guide for, the theme of it was American agriculture. And it was a time when there was not enough food in the Soviet Union. People were hungry. And here we had early videos of American grocery stores, sort of antithetical to everything we believe now about local. It was all about transport and having fresh vegetables from California, even if you live in New York. That year was very difficult. I was roughed up by the KGB. I was ready to give up my study of Russian. And what saved me was sharing food with people. At great risk, they invited me into their apartments, showed me what they had, what they could do with very little, and it was through the table and the stomach that year and my entire career in Russian was salvaged.
Wow, that's a great story. So how did you move on from creating The Taste of Russia to starting Gastronomica?
So A Taste of Russia came out in 1983, which was also the year I started teaching at Williams. And I had a very split scholarly life, you could say. I was doing quite wonderful but conventional scholarship in Russian literature, Russian culture, and Russian art. But I was also doing a lot of food writing, which at the time felt that it was on the side, but I couldn't stay away from it. I just loved it so much. And I went to Republic of Georgia, and I went there because the poet I'd written on had gone to Georgia, had been very important in his life. And so I was following his tracks and doing research, and I discovered this extraordinary cuisine that no one in the States really knew about then. So I wrote about, that was my second cookbook that came out in 1993. And it won the Julia Child Award for Cookbook of the Year from IACP. And something about having that national recognition enabled me to feel probably more secure is the word I would use in my food writing, and to start shifting the balance a little more. But I still had this split, and I was writing in the food world, in the popular press, but also in these very narrow academic journals. And interestingly, again, for this discussion of culinary diplomacy, the person who liberated me was Carême, the great 19th century French chef, really one of the first culinary diplomats, I would say, because he cooked for Talleyrand and King George the, what was it, the third, Sam?
The third, yeah, I think so.
The third, and Tsar Alexander I of Russia, and all of these great houses. And it turns out that he had gone to Russia to cook for Alexander I, but was terribly offended when the Tsar wasn't there to meet him at the boat. And he determined to go back to La Belle France and work in his great kitchens there. But he couldn't get another boat for 2 weeks, so he wandered around St. Petersburg and was appalled that this imperial city was not vertical with all these monuments. He didn't realize it was built on a swamp. Yeah. But he was really an architect manqué, which you can see from the beautiful pièces montées that he did, these beautiful
sugar sculptures.
Yeah, and marzipan. So he did a portfolio of drawings for monuments for St. Petersburg, which happens to be in the rare book library of Amherst College. And so I wrote this article about Carême and pièces montées, monuments, so it was art, Russian, and food all in one. And it was published in the Slavonic and East European Review out of the University of London. And I think maybe 50 people read it. And they weren't necessarily the people who were excited about this great food discovery. So I decided it was really important to have a place where scholars like myself could share their work, that also bridge the gap between the narrowly academic and the solely popular in one place, that also celebrated the aesthetic and the sensual side of food, but also had really serious scholarship. So that led to Gastronomica.
I know I was excited when I came across that piece on Carême when I was doing my initial research on food and diplomacy, and I found Carême's work, and I realized, yeah, he was the first real recognized culinary diplomat, and I didn't know if there was any scholarship in English on that. And Dara, I came upon your piece in that, 1994 publication. How long ago was that?
It was early 90s.
Okay,
but
yeah. So
now 51 people have read it.
Right, exactly. I might be the 51st, but I think I cited it in my piece, so maybe more people, maybe it's gotten a second life.
Why do you think it's been such a challenge to marry both your academic work and writing about food?
I think in the United States, there are a couple of reasons for it historically, although again, it's changing. It's becoming much, much easier now. But if you think about the first wave of feminism, which actually I was very much a part of when I was a young student, the whole idea was to get women out of the kitchen. So for someone to write about the domestic and the joys of being in the kitchen is a little suspect to many feminists whose whole, or at least a good part of their lives was staked on the liberation from what is admittedly or can be drudgery. So trying to put the joy back in that activity and configure it as choice as opposed to obligation, I think has been challenging. The other thing is that food is something that everyone who is lucky enough to have access to it, everyone shares. Everyone can talk about on a certain level, which is one thing that I really love about it. I mean, if you can imagine, going to a cocktail party as I did in my small New England town and talking about a Russian modernist poet and the morphemes that are so significant, in the words. And it just kills conversation. But if you start talking about Russian food, what vodka means in Russian culture, it opens up conversation. But because it's a common language, I think for many people, it doesn't seem sufficiently intellectual. Oh, yeah, I can talk about what I had for breakfast. Well, what you had for breakfast is actually extraordinarily meaningful. The culture that the food came from, the access, how it arrived on your plate, how it was served, the aesthetics of the table. I mean, you can go on and on and on, but that's not, people think of, I like to think of that Bakhtinian opposition between the cerebral and the gut, the lower bodily stratum. And food too often is relegated to that lower bodily stratum. And certainly by the great Western philosophers, taste was the lowest of the senses. Yeah, so for all those reasons, in terms of high Western culture, in terms of everyday habits, and in terms of feminism, it has been a challenge.
Yeah, that's very understandable.
And have you seen recently, sorry to jump in, have you seen recently that the shift has focused, or the focus has shifted a little bit, that there's been a little bit more acceptance in the world of academia to accept food, and in the world of food to accept academia?
I think definitely there is acceptance in academia for food, and that witness that are all of the programs that are starting to proliferate, not just in the United States. Europe was well ahead of us before then. And it used to be that the number of books, scholarly books that were published on food, or even if they're not narrowly scholarly, really smart books, I could keep track of them, and I can't begin to keep track of them now. There are so many. Although I think it has been focused more in the social sciences and the hard sciences, like the chemistry of food and the way flavor works, and investigating taste and food systems. I think that there hasn't been quite as much in the pure humanities as I would like to see. As for the academic coming into the food world, there's been a bit of it, but I think that there could be more.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see more chefs getting into writing, and it has been a little bit more popular. Dan Barber, for example, his book The Third Way The Third Plate, was very much, wasn't a cookbook, and it also wasn't scholarly academic, but it was very thoughtful and very intellectual. So he's positioning himself as a public intellectual in that the thinking about the next generation of eaters, the next, what we need to look at, how we need to look at food, and how we need to look at eating and agriculture and sustainability. And there have been a few other chefs who've been doing that sort of work, and I think that's been a positive direction.
Yes, I think it's really great, but I think there could be more of it.
There could be more.
Yeah, and so I guess I was thinking less about the chefs who are writing in thoughtful ways than about the regular kind of magazine articles that we see that still tend to be more about getting dinner on the table and don't spend as much time thinking about cultural issues that underlie that meal. But then again, you can understand that there are places for recipe magazines too, for harried people who need to get tasty meals on the table.
Right, and there will always be room for recipe books, recipe magazines. I do think that recently I've been excited about publications like Lucky Peach, because there's a little bit of balance there. There is some critical, thoughtful scholarship in that, or even Vice. I don't know if you've been following Vice and their work with
Yes.
Munchies.
Uh-huh.
They've done a lot of really interesting research and kind of surprisingly for where I thought Vice was starting to where it is now. But they've traveled the world. There was a fascinating piece about the sushi chef who got deputized by Kim Jong-il, I guess, to be his personal chef for a long time. So yeah, there has been a little bit in the popular space, but as you say, there's always room for more. Looking at the world of journals today, where would you think that there should be push? I mean, you've moved on from Gastronomica, but are there other journals like Gastronomica or Lucky Peach that you think can merge the worlds of academia and food writing?
I'll be very coy and say that there may be one coming soon,
Ah,
and I
all
won't
right.
say more about that.
That's very good to know. Very interesting to know. I look forward to learning more about that in the near future as it's released.
Let's go ahead and talk about your new cookbook. So, um, can you tell us a little bit about your new cookbook that Sam is now an owner of, Fire and Ice?
This turned out to be a very personal cookbook for me in surprising and quite wonderful ways. It really began, I'd say, in 1972 when I landed in Helsinki to start studying for a semester at the University of Helsinki. Once again, I was trying to get to the Soviet Union that has so much defined my life. And I couldn't get into the Soviet Union, so I thought I'll go someplace close by. I'll feel that northernness. I'll understand what the dark is about, and I can probably cross the border as a tourist, which in fact I was able to. But going to Helsinki, I was just blown away. It was still a very foreign country then, not as accessible as it is now. Most people didn't speak English. It was still, I think, suffering from the aftermath of World War II, which had been quite devastating. And it was extraordinarily magical for me. And then in 1980, once again, trying to get to the Soviet Union, had been accepted on a program to do dissertation research in Moscow, got married in order that the man I loved could accompany me. And that was a big change in my life. And then we got our visas. We were all set to go, had given up our apartment and everything. And it was the year that the Moscow Olympics were happening and the Soviets invaded Afghanistan and the US boycotted. And so they retaliated by going through their list of graduate students. I mean, to me, it seems like such strange retaliation that you would even care about a handful of graduate students. But they took the Jewish name Goldstein off the list. My husband, who's not a Russianist, got a visa, but I couldn't go. And so then we decided, well, where else is sort of dark and northernly? And we went to Stockholm and spent a year there. So I have lived in Finland, in Stockholm, done work for the Ministry of Culture in Norway. And after giving up Gastronomica, I really wanted to get back in the kitchen. I'd been at the computer writing about food too long. I'd been close to 20 years. I wanted those transformations that happen in the oven, those smells, putting my hand in the dough. And so I thought, what cookbook can I write? And it came to me that this was the Nordic countries were such a big part of my life that would be a good thing to do. And it actually caught a wave, unlike any of my previous cookbooks. Were unto themselves.
Right, and there's a huge interest right now, of course, in Nordic cooking. I guess Rene Redzepi would probably be considered the touchstone of that, or something, from his restaurant in Copenhagen, Noma, which is named best restaurant in the world a couple of years in a row, and Faviken up in Sweden. And there's just a huge interest in the pureness and I don't know, the kind of foraging and things that have to go on in such a difficult climate. What are the recipes? I'm excited to make these lusabuller. saffron buns.
You're right in time. Make them on December 13th.
Exactly. That's for Santa Lucia Day. I did this a couple of years ago. For some reason, I just decided to take on a different holiday tradition. But I am excited to try your recipe. It looks delicious. What other recipes in here are you excited about, or do you think I should turn straight to?
You should turn straight to the ice cellar salmon. You probably know gravlax because it's fairly ubiquitous. It's like the gateway food to Scandinavian cooking. But the ice cellar salmon, instead of doing a cure where you rub the salmon fillet with a mixture of sugar and salt and then let it sit with dill for a couple of days, you actually put the salmon, a chunk of salmon, in brine that has the sugar and salt dissolved in it, peppercorns. You can throw in some juniper berries and lots of dill. And the flavor is even more beautiful and the texture more silken than gravlax. I never thought I would say that I like something better than gravlax, but this one I do. And the whitefish tartare is really beautiful as well. It's very lightly cured whitefish, just overnight, basically, and then you mix it with all kinds of herbs, chives and parsley and a little bit of onion, and you bind it with just a touch of mayonnaise, and it is gorgeous.
Wow.
And not to mention all of the baked goods, the Swedish almond wreath that has almond paste in it, and there's so many.
Yeah, especially with the holiday season, I think that there's so many delicious Swedish baked goods, especially that feel so appropriate for the season. Have you had a chance to speak, or I'm sure you've met a chef like Chef Redzepi or Magnus Nilsson of Faviken? Have you batted around ideas with those chefs for the book, or were they inspirational to you at all? Or have you been inspirational to them?
Well, that remains to be seen. I probably put it that way. But I think that when I was starting to work on this book, I went to Noma because I really wanted to understand. I want to be at the epicenter of New Nordic. And if you look at the very first sentence of my introduction, I'm standing there looking at Noma. It's a gray Copenhagen day in November, very much like it is outside here in Williamstown now, just a looming gray sky. And I had come, it was as though I'd found the Holy Grail, and I'm standing there waiting to go inside and feeling this sort of nervousness. Will it be everything that I had hoped for? You know, I've been so built up. And it was quite an extraordinary meal. But my cookbook is not New Nordic, it's classic Nordic. So there are a few things that you can forage, like the mushrooms and some berries, but it's predicated on home cooking for regular folks in the kitchen who have very busy lives like I do. I don't have a staff, and I tested all the recipes myself with very accessible ingredients. But definitely the New Nordic served as a sort of background to what I was doing.
What is your process for testing recipes or choosing recipes for a book?
There are several ways in which I choose the recipes. One has to do with taste memory. So as I mentioned, this book was so personal because suddenly I was catapulted back to being a 21-year-old tasting Finnish food for the first time and being blown away by the flavors. And I tried to recreate that. I actually remembered. I happened to have a very good food memory of spectacular dishes I've eaten over the years. And so I wanted to remember those flavors and recreate them. I got recipes from friends of mine in all of those different countries, things I had tasted with them. I did a lot of research. I can read cookbooks in Swedish quite well. I can work my way through Norwegian and Danish, and had help with the Finnish. So that also, if I saw something that I liked, then I tried to put it together with what I tasted and recreate it for the American home cook. So there were a number of different ways. And then I tested everything.
Mm. How many times do you normally test a recipe?
This is my fifth cookbook, and I'm getting very good at knowing how things work.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm lucky, it works on the first try, and then I can just tweak it as I'm doing it. Some of them I had to test multiple times because they weren't quite right. One of them being the Lucibuller, the Lucia buns, because the first time I made them, I felt that they were lovely, but the dough was a little too stiff. It was too dry. And with that, you never know whether it's the flour you're using or how much humidity is in the house. And I was making it in December and the air was very dry, but I felt that I needed to use less flour. So that one I tested several times until I got this really tender bun. I hope you find them as tender as mine turned out, Sam.
Yes, I'll report back. So yeah, I just want to give a little plug for this. It's called Fire and Ice: Classic Nordic Cooking, published by 10 Speed Press. It's an absolutely gorgeous book. The photography is stunning. You said done by a Swedish photographer. The recipes look fantastic, and we'll report back about how they work in my kitchen. But I wanted to get back a little bit too to the culinary diplomacy stuff and hear a little bit from your travels. It sounds like you've been throughout the Baltics, throughout the USSR, and I'm sure you've traveled since the fall of the Soviet Union back. How have you seen the use of food? You said when you were first in Helsinki, the language was difficult. Everybody focuses on food now. Food is very popular, and I'm sure we've all benefited from that rise. But from the beginning of your career, how have you seen food as being an important tool of communication and academia and research, all of that? How does that kind of come together for you?
I think that is really the essential question, that food is the tool of communication, or maybe I would even take away those two words, tool of, and say food is communication. And what it communicates or fails to communicate is everything. One of the articles I wrote in graduate school, even before I knew that I was actively combining food scholarship and Russian scholarship, was on a 19th century Russian novel, one of these that goes on and on and on, called The Golubyov Family. And in it, the matriarch of the family denies her children food. The phrase that's used is she sometimes throws them a bone. It's a beautiful, despairing study of the power of the mother and how cruel people can be to one another. But I just loved it because food became the nexus around which everything else in the novel revolved. So I think that food serves as a symbolic marker of relationships, and it's at the core of hospitality. And one of the things that I find so poignant in today's world is that in Islam, food is everything. You give food to your guests. You overlook enmity when someone comes into your house as a guest. That urge for hospitality is so strong. The Russian word for hospitality breaks down into two roots, bread and salt. You give of the most essential food stuff and also the dearest, because salt was once very expensive. So throughout cultures, throughout the world, you find this kind of symbolism. But it also is a way to communicate pleasure, to communicate dislike. If you don't know a language, it doesn't matter if you're sharing a meal. There are certain conventions around the table that can be understood, or if they're not understood, like if you're eating with the wrong hand, then you very quickly learn about another culture. So I think that even if you don't have language ability in a foreign language, the food can bring you to an understanding much more quickly than, say, trying to learn the vocabulary through a primer to the language.
Yeah, that's very very helpful, and definitely that's why we started this podcast was to talk in this way and to really understand the value of food. And I think as simple and as profound as it is, food is communication. I think that's a very valuable way of thinking, both of food and of communication, that I've heard it described as almost the lowest common denominator or the lowest hanging fruit when you're with a stranger or an in-law or somebody from a different culture, somebody from your own culture. It's the thing that we can all, whether or not you speak the same language, it's the first, the easiest, the most visceral, the most deep thing that we can all use as a tool of communication or as communication. So,
yeah, I'd say it's the most immediate. It is definitely a common denominator. I don't like to think of it as lowest because that sort of diminishes it. I would like to think that it is the highest form of common denominator.
I like that better. Lowest hanging fruit as the food metaphor, and highest common denominator in some way, highest form. We were both curious as to scholars. Kelsey is finishing up her master's now. I have my master's in different fields. She's studying international education. I study diplomacy and conflict resolution. But do you have advice for young folks like us and others who may be listening to this who may want to be pursuing a career looking at food and research, food and international relations, food and diplomacy, food and education, where we all love, Kelsey and I both love food. A lot of the people who reach out to me from around the world see the vitality, see the importance of food as a tool in all these different genres and all these different parts of the world, but have been unable to convince their own advisors, their own professors, or their own parents that there's validity here. Do you have advice?
Or even themselves, I guess.
Or even
sometimes.
themselves. Second guess myself all the time in this.
I just want to say that I think it's really wonderful that you're pursuing what you love and what you believe in. And I do feel that you're in your late 20s. Is that right? More or less?
30. I'm 30.
Okay, you're across the divide.
Across the divide.
No, you're still quite young, and I think it's hard when you're starting out because you don't have the foothold yet. But I really feel that with your enthusiasms and with the intelligence that you're bringing to what you're thinking about, you'll be able to look back within the decade and find that you have found a place to establish yourselves in that allows you to do what you really believe in a meaningful way that is not marginalized. I can't obviously tell you what that is now, but I do feel that the world is opening up to that. And the more people who engage in the study of food in a profound and deep way, the easier it will continue to be for those who come along. One of the things I would like to see that I think actually would help young scholars like you is in this culinary, the Chef's Corps, which is part of the State Department culinary diplomacy program. I think it's fabulous that this exists. I would like to see it expanded so that it isn't solely chefs who are being sent around the world to share American food. It's an immediate way, as we've talked about, for people to taste, to get a taste of America, if you will. And the chefs are wonderful teachers and they're wonderful explicators, but they haven't all delved into the kind of cultural history that I think you and others are engaged with. So I would like to see a scholar like Jessica Harris, for instance, be sent to a city somewhere on the African continent, perhaps along with the chef, if they want to have that kind of pairing, or even on her own, to talk about the profound impact that African slaves had on American cuisine. If someone goes to Uzbekistan, then perhaps have someone who can talk about Korean Americans and what they have brought to American food culture because there's a huge Korean community in Uzbekistan. So I think that there are ways in which that program could become even more far-reaching and also give a kind of credibility and legitimacy to the sort of scholarly explorations that you're hoping to do more of.
Yeah, and a little bit of background for our readers on, or sorry, listeners. Jessica Harris, for example, she is a doctor, Dr. Jessica Harris. She's been doing a lot of work on African diaspora foodways, and would definitely be a fascinating scholar and writer and chef to be able to travel and make those connections between the old world and the new world. And I do think that the United States, as the melting pot, the fondue pot, the salad, whatever culinary metaphor we want to use, is very ripe for this kind of dialogue and this kind of discussion back and forth, whether it's Korean food, Korean Americans, Chef Roy Choi in LA connecting, the Korean taco truck with a Mexican diaspora also in LA and making that connection and bringing that back to Mexico, bringing that to Korea, or Michael Twitty, who's both he's a Black and Jewish chef, and trying to connect what that means in America today. It would be definitely fascinating for state to take this on, and they've engaged in public diplomacy outreach, cultural diplomacy outreach for decades. And as Dara mentioned, this State Department diplomatic culinary partnership is only 3 years old, and there's a huge amount of space to grow and huge opportunity for not just chefs who might not be thinking in these ways, who might just know their tools. They just might know the kitchen, but they might not know about the cultural exchange or the background or the history, of the kitchen and of American cuisine and of the connection with Korean cuisine or Australian cuisine or Nordic cuisine. So I think that's a very valuable suggestion.
So work on it.
Yeah, I'll make the suggestion
Program
next time
development.
next time I'm back in DC. I'll bring it up.
So, Dara, what is your universal truth about food?
You fed me that question sort of earlier, and I think that food is communication because it represents so much. It is sustenance and nutrition on the most very basic level. We cannot survive without some kind of nourishment. But very quickly, it moves beyond that to accrue all sorts of very deep meanings. It connects us with memory. It connects us with the past. It makes us think about the future. We can enjoy it truly viscerally in the moment. It has symbolic meaning. It has religious meaning when you think about all of the rituals. And certainly in so many religions, the way that the year is construed doesn't have to do only with the agricultural cycle, but also with the cycle of feasting and fasting, which often coincides with an agricultural cycle. But it's a way of thinking about the world, of seeing the world through food, taking pleasure from it, but also abstaining from it. So I just think that it touches every aspect of life in very beautiful, but also often very devastating ways. So I don't have a single word for that other than it communicates a lot.
Well, how can our listeners reach out to you, or where can people follow your work?
I have a pretty static website. I do a lot of writing, but I don't blog. So there's a lot of information about me on daragoldstein.com. And I hope you'll take a look at my cookbooks because they really tell a lot about me and the way I think about food, particularly Fire and Ice, which is my new favorite one.
Do you have an Instagram for this book? I've been following the account.
Yes, my daughter's actually doing that for me. She is my secret social media consultant, no longer secret, but she really enjoys all of that. I do have a Twitter account, and I do tweet, occasionally, and that's at Dara_Goldstein. But I don't do that many times a day. It's really only if there's something that seems urgent to me or profound or really wonderful that I've discovered.
Perfect. I have the handle for Instagram, so people who want to follow the cookbook as well as some of the new recipes from Fire and Ice. It's Classic Nordic Cooking. So ClassicNordicCooking. And that's on Instagram.
And there's a Facebook page. How could I have forgotten?
Oh, perfect.
Almost 1,000 likes already. And that is Fire Plus Ice Classic Nordic Cooking. So, wonderful. Yeah, you can see everything about the book up there.
Great.
Sorry, see, I'm still living in an old-fashioned world, but it's quite a wonderful one.
So, Dara, thank you. Definitely check out the book, Fire and Ice. Dara's also been involved with the Oxford Companion to Sugar and Sweets, which, as a former pastry chef, that's exciting to me. If you want to learn about Russian or Georgian cooking, or vegetarian cooking, all of these things, Dara has the answer for you. So thank you very much again. This has been such a pleasure chatting with you, Dara.
Thanks to both of you, and I really hope you'll continue to pursue what you're doing.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you talking about some of the beginning struggles of wanting to pursue food, but also realizing, you did need to marriage the academics with it. So I appreciate you for talking about that.
It's possible.
It's possible.
Eventually get gray hairs, that's all.
Sooner or later, we'll all get them, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks again, Dara.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to The Culinary Citizen. Join us next time. We'll be speaking with Chef Jesper Volmer, chef to the royal family of Denmark. Should be a fascinating conversation, especially after we've spoken with Dara about Fire and Ice and her interest in classic Nordic cooking. Thanks again.